Shut your mouth and get back in that cab, boy! Officer Brad Thompson slams his palm against the taxi's hood, the sharp crack echoing across the street. The black driver steps back instinctively, hands raised defensively as Thompson steps closer, jabbing his finger inches from the man's face. "You think you can mouth off to me?" Thompson's spit flies as he speaks, his face twisted with rage. "I'll have your hack license pulled by tomorrow, you hear me?" The driver, impeccably dressed, calm despite the assault, simply nods. "Yes, sir, officer." Thompson doesn't know that this quiet, respectful taxi driver has a badge of his own, a federal badge. What happens next will destroy Thompson's career and shock an entire police precinct. Have you ever watched someone abuse their power thinking they'd never face consequences? Keep watching. 3 months earlier, Special Agent Devin Clark had walked into FBI headquarters in Chicago with 15 years of federal law enforcement under his belt. Decorated, respected, specialized in corruption cases that others couldn't crack. "We've got a problem," his supervisor, Agent Sarah Martinez, had said, sliding a thick manila folder across the conference table. "Precinct 19. Multiple complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, civil rights violations, all dismissed by Internal Affairs." Devin opened the file. Photo after photo of black and Hispanic civilians with bruises, broken bones, trauma written across their faces. The complaints dated back 3 years, all bearing the same dismissive stamp. Unfounded. "The complainants?" Devin asked. "Suddenly unwilling to testify, witnesses disappear, evidence gets lost." Martinez leaned forward. "We need someone inside. Someone who can document the pattern." Devin studied the roster of officers. One name appeared in over 60% of the complaints. Officer Brad Thompson, 8 years on the force, multiple commendations for proactive policing. 0 disciplinary actions despite 43 formal complaints. "He's untouchable," Martinez continued. "Union protection, political connections, commanding officer who looks the other way. Traditional investigation methods have failed. So we go undercover. Deep cover, 3 to 6 months minimum. You'll be a taxi driver, perfect cover. You'll interact with police regularly, witness their behavior firsthand, document everything." That was Devin's specialty. Patient, methodical, building ironclad cases that prosecutors couldn't lose. Now, 12 weeks into Operation Clean Sweep, Devin Clark had become David Washington, professional taxi driver. His yellow Crown Victoria was equipped with hidden cameras, audio recording devices, and a direct communication line to the FBI surveillance team monitoring from a nondescript van parked 6 blocks away. Every morning at 6 a.m., Devin would check in with his handler via encrypted phone. Every evening, he'd upload the day's recordings to a secure federal server. His taxi company believed he was a former security guard looking for steady work. His neighbors thought he was a divorced father trying to make ends meet. The truth was more complex. Devin had grown up in neighborhoods like this one, where interactions with police could escalate from routine to dangerous in seconds. He understood the fear in civilians' eyes when squad cars appeared. He'd experienced that fear himself long before he had a federal badge to protect him. But now he had something more powerful than protection: documentation. His logbook read like a catalog of constitutional violations. September 15th. Officer Thompson conducted 7 traffic stops in 4 hours, all involving vehicles driven by minorities. September 22nd. Witnessed Thompson search a teenager's backpack without consent during a routine jaywalking stop. October 3rd. Recorded Thompson using racial slurs during arrest of unarmed black college student. Each incident was carefully documented, cross-referenced, and verified through multiple sources. Devin had built relationships with other drivers, shop owners, residents, people who'd witnessed Thompson's behavior for years but never had anyone willing to listen. Thompson's pattern was predictable. Morning coffee at Sal's Diner on Franklin Street, where he'd joke with other officers about cleaning up the neighborhood. Afternoon patrols through predominantly black and Hispanic areas, with an average of 12 stops per shift compared to 3 stops in white neighborhoods. Evening paperwork sessions where he'd routinely embellish reports to justify excessive force. Devin had recorded it all. Thompson's partner, Officer Miguel Santos, presented a different profile. Young, idealistic, visibly uncomfortable with Thompson's methods, but too junior to challenge them effectively. Santos would be crucial, a potential inside witness if the case went to trial. The precinct captain, James Mueller, showed willful blindness that bordered on complicity. 42 complaints against Thompson had crossed Mueller's desk in 3 years, 42 dismissals with minimal investigation. The pattern suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate cover-up. Devon's handler had been clear about the stakes. This wasn't just about one rogue cop. Thompson represented a systemic problem, officers who viewed certain communities as enemy territory rather than citizens to protect and serve. But building a federal case required patience. They needed irrefutable evidence of civil rights violations. They needed documentation that would survive court challenges and political pressure. Most importantly, they needed Thompson to reveal his true nature on camera in a way that no defense attorney could explain away. Devon checked his watch. 2:30 p.m. Time for the afternoon shift. He adjusted his taxi company cap, checked his recording equipment, and pulled away from the curb. He had no idea that today, October 17th, would be the day Thompson finally gave him everything he needed. Devon's afternoon fare was Mrs. Eleanor Washington, a 73-year-old retired teacher who lived in the Bronzeville neighborhood. She climbed into his taxi with careful movements, her arthritis making every step deliberate. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Washington," Devon said, adjusting his rearview mirror. Over 3 months, he'd driven her to medical appointments 6 times. She always tipped exactly $2 and always said, "God bless you, young man," when she exited. "Hello, David. Northwestern Memorial, please. Dr. Kumar's office on the 7th floor." She settled into the back seat, clutching her purse tightly. "I'm running a bit late for my cardiology appointment." Devon pulled into traffic, taking the route along Lakeshore Drive. Mrs. Washington had mentioned her heart condition during previous rides: high blood pressure, irregular rhythm, medications that made her dizzy. Today, she seemed more anxious than usual, checking her watch repeatedly. "Everything all right, Mrs. Washington?" "Oh, you know how it is. These doctor visits make me nervous. At my age, you never know what they might find." Devon was turning onto Michigan Avenue when the flashing lights appeared in his mirror. His heart rate immediately elevated, not from fear but from anticipation. After 12 weeks of careful documentation, police stops had become opportunities to gather evidence. "What's this about?" Mrs. Washington asked, peering through the rear window. "Probably just routine," Devon said, though he knew better. He'd been driving perfectly. No traffic violations, no erratic behavior. This was exactly the kind of pretext stop he'd been documenting. Officer Brad Thompson approached the driver's side window with his characteristic swagger, one hand resting on his service weapon. His partner, Officer Santos, hung back by the squad car, looking uncomfortable. Devon lowered his window, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. His hidden recording device activated automatically when the car stopped. "License and registration," Thompson demanded without preamble. No explanation for the stop, no professional courtesy. Classic constitutional violation number 1. "Certainly, officer." "May I ask what this is about?" Devon reached slowly for his glove compartment, narrating his movements to establish cooperation on the recording. Thompson's response was immediate and aggressive. "Don't give me attitude, boy. I saw you fail to signal back there. License, now!" Devon had signaled properly, a fact that would be confirmed by the taxi's dash camera. He handed over his commercial driver's license and vehicle registration. Thompson scrutinized the documents with exaggerated suspicion. "David Washington." Thompson read aloud, pronouncing the name with obvious disdain. "What kind of work do you do, David?" "I drive a taxi, sir, as you can see from the vehicle and my commercial license." "Smart mouth," Thompson muttered, loud enough for his body camera to record. He walked around the vehicle, peering through windows, looking for any excuse to escalate. "Step out of the vehicle." Mrs. Washington leaned forward. "Officer, is this really necessary? I have a medical appointment." Thompson's head snapped toward her, his face darkening. "Lady, nobody's talking to you. Keep your mouth shut." Devon felt anger surge through him, not just at Thompson's treatment of him, but at the officer's callous dismissal of an elderly woman's medical needs. This was exactly the kind of behavior that had generated 43 complaints. "Officer, Mrs. Washington has a cardiology appointment," Devon said calmly. "She's already running late." "Oh, so now you're giving me medical advice?" Thompson's voice rose. I said get out of the vehicle. Don't make me ask twice. Devon complied, moving slowly and deliberately. Thompson immediately positioned himself aggressively close, invading personal space, a classic intimidation tactic. Turn around, hands on the roof. Am I under arrest? Devon asked. What's the specific charge? Resisting arrest if you keep running your mouth. The logic was circular and legally absurd. You can't resist an arrest that hasn't been made, but Devon recognized the setup. Thompson was creating a narrative for his eventual report. Santos approached hesitantly. Brad, maybe you should shut up and do your job. Thompson snapped at his partner. Call for backup. This one's giving me trouble. Devon wasn't giving anyone trouble. He stood perfectly still, hands flat against the taxi's roof, complying with every instruction. But Thompson needed to escalate to justify what came next. What's in your pockets? Thompson began roughly patting Devon down, his hands aggressive and invasive. Wallet, keys, and my cell phone, Devon replied. Thompson pulled out Devon's wallet, flipping through it with deliberate slowness. Credit cards, cash, taxi company ID, driver's license, everything perfectly legitimate. Thompson's frustration was visible. He'd expected to find something, anything, to justify his suspicions. Mrs. Washington's voice came from the back seat, strained and worried. Officer, please, my heart medication, I need to get to my doctor. Thompson wheeled around, his face flushed with anger. Lady, I told you to keep quiet. You want to get arrested too? You can't arrest her for speaking, Devon said firmly. She's done nothing wrong. There's that mouth again. Thompson stepped closer, his breath hot against Devon's face. You think you know the law better than me? I know enough to understand constitutional rights. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Thompson's jaw clenched. In his experience, taxi drivers didn't quote constitutional law. They cowered, apologized, and accepted whatever treatment he dished out. Constitutional rights? Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about rights? How about my right to keep criminals off the street? What crime am I accused of committing? Failure to signal, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. Thompson was building his list in real time. How's that for a start? Devon had signaled properly. He wasn't resisting anything. And asking legitimate questions didn't constitute disorderly conduct. Every charge Thompson mentioned was fabricated, and it was all being recorded. Backup arrived. 2 more squad cars, 4 additional officers. What had started as a routine traffic stop now involved 6 police officers surrounding a taxi driver and an elderly woman with a heart condition. Mrs. Washington was crying now, her breathing shallow and rapid. Please, I just need to get to my doctor. My chest is starting to hurt. Devon felt genuine alarm. Mrs. Washington's distress wasn't an act. She was having a medical episode brought on by stress and fear. Officer Thompson, she needs medical attention, Devon said urgently. What she needs is to learn respect, Thompson replied. He turned back to Devon, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. You know what your problem is? You people think the rules don't apply to you. Think you can drive around my neighborhood, cause trouble, and walk away. Your neighborhood. The possessiveness in Thompson's voice revealed everything, his view of policing as territorial control rather than public service. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Cell phones were recording from multiple angles. Thompson was performing now, putting on a show for his fellow officers and any civilians watching. Turn around, Thompson ordered. Hands behind your back. On what charge? Devon asked. I'll figure that out later. The statement was a confession of malicious prosecution, recorded by multiple devices. Thompson was arresting first and inventing charges afterward. Exactly the pattern of behavior that had generated dozens of complaints. As the handcuffs clicked around Devon's wrists, Mrs. Washington cried out from the back seat. My chest! I can't breathe properly. Thompson glanced at her dismissively. She'll be fine! Drama queen! But Mrs. Washington wasn't fine. Her face had gone pale, her breathing was labored, and she was clutching her chest with obvious distress. Devon's FBI training included medical emergency procedures. Mrs. Washington was showing signs of cardiac distress, possibly a heart attack triggered by the traumatic police encounter. She needs an ambulance, Devon said firmly. Now. Thompson hesitated, finally recognizing that ignoring a medical emergency could create liability issues. He gestured reluctantly to Santos. Call an EMT. As paramedics arrived and began treating Mrs. Washington, Thompson led Devon toward the squad car. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown larger, their phones capturing every moment. "You did this," Thompson hissed in Devon's ear. "Your attitude put that old woman in the hospital." It was the final insult, blaming the victim for police misconduct. But it was also the final piece of evidence Devon needed. Thompson had no idea he'd just provided the FBI with a textbook example of civil rights violations under color of law. The booking process at Precinct 19 was a study in bureaucratic humiliation, and Thompson orchestrated every moment of it. "Empty your pockets," the desk sergeant ordered as Devon stood before the processing desk. Thompson hovered nearby, arms crossed, watching every movement with satisfaction. Devon complied methodically: wallet, keys, cell phone, taxi company radio, breath mints, and exactly $127 in cash from the day's fares. Each item was cataloged and placed in a manila envelope. "What's this?" Thompson held up Devon's cell phone, examining it suspiciously. "Pretty expensive phone for a taxi driver." "It's a smartphone," Devon replied evenly. "Most people have them." "Most people, sure. But taxi drivers?" Thompson's tone suggested Devon had been caught with stolen property. "How exactly does a cab driver afford a phone like this?" The question was designed to humiliate, the implication being that black taxi drivers shouldn't own quality electronics. Devon said nothing, recognizing the bait for what it was. Officer Santos stood in the corner, his discomfort increasingly visible. He'd watched the entire traffic stop, heard Thompson's inflammatory language, witnessed Mrs. Washington's medical emergency. His training manual was clear about de-escalation procedures and constitutional protections. Nothing he'd witnessed aligned with department policy. Thompson began dictating his report to the desk sergeant, each word carefully chosen to build his fabricated narrative. The subject failed to signal while turning onto Michigan Avenue. When stopped, the subject became belligerent and uncooperative. The subject repeatedly argued with officers and refused to comply with lawful orders. Every statement was demonstrably false, contradicted by body camera footage and civilian recordings, but Thompson had written similar reports dozens of times, confident that his word would prevail over any complaints. The subject's passenger became disruptive, interfering with police procedures, Thompson continued. The subject's aggressive behavior contributed to the passenger's medical distress. Santos finally spoke up. "Brad, the passenger was just asking about her appointment." Thompson's glare silenced him immediately. "Officer Santos, write your own report. Focus on the facts, not your feelings." The message was clear. Fall in line or face consequences. Santos nodded reluctantly, understanding the precinct's unspoken hierarchy. Rookies who challenged senior officers found themselves with undesirable assignments, negative performance reviews, and isolation from their colleagues. Devon's one phone call was monitored as expected. He dialed the taxi company's dispatch number, speaking in code his FBI handler would understand. "This is David Washington, cab 47. I've been detained by police. Need to notify my emergency contact about the delay." The dispatcher, actually FBI agent Martinez, responded appropriately. "Copy that, David. We'll handle notifications and arrange coverage for your shift." Translation: the FBI surveillance team was already mobilizing. Legal counsel was being contacted. Federal prosecutors were being briefed. The wheels of justice were turning, though Thompson remained oblivious. While Devon was processed, Mrs. Washington was being treated at Northwestern Memorial's emergency room. The paramedics had stabilized her blood pressure and heart rhythm, but doctors confirmed that severe stress had triggered a cardiac episode. Her daughter, contacted by hospital staff, was en route from Milwaukee. News of Mrs. Washington's hospitalization spread quickly through the neighborhood. She was beloved in the community, a retired teacher who'd educated 2 generations, a church organist, a woman who'd never caused trouble for anyone. The contrast was striking. A 73-year-old retired teacher in the hospital because police terrorized her during a routine taxi ride to her cardiologist. Local social media exploded with eyewitness accounts and cell phone footage. The hashtag #TaxiDriverJustice began trending locally, then spread beyond Chicago as the videos went viral. Thompson remained confident. He'd survived 43 complaints without consequences. His union representative was already en route. His commanding officer would handle any media inquiries with the standard response: "We're reviewing the incident thoroughly." But this time was different, though Thompson didn't know it yet. At FBI headquarters, Agent Martinez was assembling a task force. Devon's 3 months of documentation provided overwhelming evidence of systematic civil rights violations. Today's incident was simply the culmination, the moment when Thompson's pattern of behavior could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Federal prosecutors were reviewing Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. The statute carried serious penalties, up to 10 years in federal prison for willful violations of constitutional rights. Devon sat quietly in his holding cell, reviewing the day's events. Thompson had exceeded even his worst expectations. The unnecessary escalation, the disregard for Mrs. Washington's medical emergency, the fabricated charges, everything was documented by multiple recording devices. More importantly, Thompson had revealed his true character in front of witnesses. Santos had seen everything. The civilian crowd had recorded everything. Even Thompson's own body camera had captured his violations. As evening approached, Devon knew his undercover assignment was essentially complete. 3 months of careful investigation had culminated in a single, devastating incident that would provide federal prosecutors with an ironclad case. Thompson believed he'd arrested a troublesome taxi driver. He'd actually destroyed his own career and provided the FBI with everything they needed to clean up Precinct 19. The only question now was how much longer the charade would continue before Devon revealed who he really was. The FBI field office in downtown Chicago buzzed with controlled urgency at 6:47 p.m. Agent Sarah Martinez ended her phone call with federal prosecutors and grabbed her jacket. 3 months of meticulous planning was about to pay off, but timing was critical. "Agent Clark's cover is blown the moment we walk into that precinct," she told her team. "We go in hard, fast, and by the book. No room for procedural errors." At Precinct 19, Devon sat in Interview Room B, still handcuffed, waiting for Thompson to begin his interrogation. Thompson was savoring the moment. He'd caught what he believed was an uppity taxi driver who needed to be taught a lesson about respect. "So, David Washington," Thompson said, settling into his chair with obvious satisfaction. "Want to tell me why you were really in that neighborhood today?" "I was driving a passenger to her medical appointment." "Right, medical appointment." Thompson's tone dripped with skepticism. "Funny how you criminals always have such convenient stories." Devon remained silent. Every word Thompson spoke was being recorded by the interview room's audio system, evidence that would soon be reviewed by federal prosecutors. "Here's what I think happened," Thompson continued, leaning back in his chair. "I think you were chasing houses, looking for easy targets. An old lady makes a perfect cover, right? Who's going to suspect a sweet grandmother?" The theory was absurd, contradicted by months of Devon's legitimate taxi driving records. But Thompson was building his narrative, constructing a story that would justify his actions regardless of evidence. "You want to know what your real problem is?" Thompson's voice grew more aggressive. "You think because you can speak properly, dress nice, act educated, that makes you better than other people like you. But I see through the act." Devon absorbed the insults silently, recognizing them as additional evidence of Thompson's racial bias. Each word would be transcribed, analyzed, and presented to a federal jury. "You people always think you're smarter than the cops," Thompson continued. "Think you can outsmart the system, but I've been doing this for 8 years. I know your type." At that moment, the interview room door opened. Desk Sergeant Williams stuck his head in, looking confused. "Thompson, there's some FBI agents here asking about your taxi driver arrest." Thompson's confident expression flickered momentarily. "FBI? What do they want?" "They're asking to speak with the commanding officer, and they want to see the suspect." Thompson recovered quickly. "Probably some federal transportation violation. Tell them I'm conducting an interview. They can wait." But Sergeant Williams looked increasingly uncomfortable. "They're not waiting, Thompson. Agent Martinez is here with credentials and paperwork. Captain Muller wants to see you immediately." Devon felt his pulse quicken. The moment of revelation was approaching. Thompson stood reluctantly, his earlier confidence beginning to crack. "Watch him," he told Williams, gesturing toward Devon. "Don't let him make any more phone calls." 5 minutes later, Thompson walked into Captain Mueller's office to find 3 FBI agents waiting. Agent Martinez sat across from Mueller's desk, a thick federal folder open before her. "Officer Thompson," Captain Mueller said, his voice carefully neutral. "These federal agents have some questions about your arrest this afternoon." Agent Martinez looked up from her files. "Officer Thompson, you arrested a man named David Washington today on charges of failure to signal, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am. The subject was uncooperative and belligerent during a routine traffic stop." Martinez nodded. "I see. And you're certain about the subject's identity?" "David Washington, age 38, taxi driver. I've got his license right here." Martinez exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Officer Thompson, I need to inform you that the man you arrested is not David Washington." Thompson's face registered confusion. "What do you mean? I've got his license, his registration." "Those documents are part of his cover identity," Martinez said calmly. "The man in your holding cell is Special Agent Devin Clark, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He's been conducting an undercover operation in this precinct for the past 3 months. The words hit Thompson like a physical blow. His face went white, then red, then white again. That's impossible," Thompson stammered. "He's a taxi driver. I've seen him around the neighborhood for months." "Yes, you have," Martinez confirmed. "Agent Clark has been documenting police interactions as part of Operation Clean Sweep, a federal investigation into civil rights violations in this precinct." Captain Mueller leaned forward, his own face pale. "Are you telling me that Officer Thompson arrested a federal agent?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And everything Officer Thompson said and did today was recorded by Agent Clark's surveillance equipment." Martinez opened her folder and began reading from Devin's reports. September 15th, Officer Thompson conducted 7 traffic stops, all involving minority drivers. September 22nd, Thompson searched a minor's backpack without probable cause. October 3rd, Thompson used racial slurs during an arrest. Each date felt like a hammer blow to Thompson's chest. 3 months of behavior he'd thought was unobserved had been meticulously documented by a federal agent. October 17th, today, Martinez continued, Thompson conducted an illegal pretext stop, used racially charged language, fabricated charges, and showed callous disregard for a civilian's medical emergency. Thompson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Everything he'd said, every insult he'd hurled, every constitutional violation he'd committed, all recorded by the FBI. "Where is Agent Clark now?" Martinez asked. "Interview room B," Mueller replied weakly. "I'll need to speak with him immediately. And Officer Thompson, you're relieved of duty pending federal investigation." Thompson finally found his voice. "You can't do this! I have union representation. I was doing my job." "Your job doesn't include violating citizens' constitutional rights," Martinez replied firmly. "Agent Clark will be released immediately, and federal charges are being prepared." As the implications sank in, Thompson's bravado crumbled completely. The taxi driver he'd humiliated, insulted, and arrested was a 15-year veteran federal agent. Every racist comment, every abuse of power, every constitutional violation had been documented for a federal case. Minutes later, Devin was escorted from the holding cell to Captain Mueller's office. The transformation was immediate and striking. Gone was the submissive taxi driver, replaced by a confident federal agent who commanded respect. "Agent Clark," Martinez said formally, "are you prepared to provide testimony regarding today's events?" Devin looked directly at Thompson, who stood frozen in the corner. "Yes, ma'am. I have detailed documentation of multiple civil rights violations, including racial profiling, excessive force, and malicious prosecution." Thompson stared at the man he'd called boy just hours earlier, a federal agent whose investigation would now destroy his career and potentially send him to prison. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The hunter had become the hunted, and Thompson was just beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The conference room at Precinct 19 had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. FBI agents occupied one side of the table, their files and recording equipment spread with military precision. Captain Mueller sat at the head, his career hanging in the balance. Internal Affairs Detective Rebecca Foster took notes furiously, trying to capture every detail of what was becoming the worst scandal in the precinct's history. Agent Devin Clark, no longer in handcuffs or taxi driver disguise, sat calmly as Agent Martinez presented the evidence methodically. 3 months of documentation filled bankers' boxes that lined the wall. Operation Clean Sweep began after we received 43 separate complaints about civil rights violations in this precinct, Martinez explained to the room. All 43 were dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded or unsubstantiated. Detective Foster shifted uncomfortably. She'd signed off on most of those dismissals. Agent Clark was inserted as David Washington taxi driver to document patterns of police misconduct that traditional oversight had failed to address. Devin opened his first evidence folder. September 12th, my third day undercover. Officer Thompson pulled over Marcus Carter, a 19-year-old college student, for allegedly looking suspicious while walking to class. The body camera footage played on the conference room monitor. Thompson's voice filled the room. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, kid? You don't look like you belong here." Captain Muller winced. The student was clearly Asian American, well-dressed, carrying textbooks. The only suspicious thing about him was his race in Thompson's mind. "Thompson searched his backpack without consent," Devin continued. "Found nothing illegal but kept the kid on the sidewalk for 47 minutes running multiple database checks. The official report listed it as a brief investigatory stop." Devin clicked to the next file. September 18th, Thompson stopped Maria Gonzalez, a nurse driving home from her night shift at Chicago General Hospital. More footage. Thompson approaches a car driven by a Latina woman in medical scrubs. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. License and registration." "Officer, I'm just driving home from work. Was I speeding?" "I'll ask the questions here. How much have you had to drink tonight?" "Nothing, sir. I've been working a 12-hour shift at the hospital." Thompson had forced her through field sobriety tests, despite no evidence of impairment, then searched her car, claiming he smelled marijuana. He found nothing, but the humiliation was complete. A medical professional treated like a criminal in front of her own neighborhood. "The report claimed she exhibited signs of intoxication," Devin said. "She was stone sober, exhausted from saving lives." Captain Muller's jaw tightened. "How many incidents do you have documented?" 73 traffic stops, 26 pedestrian encounters, and 15 arrests over 3 months, Devin replied. 97% involve minorities. Thompson's stop rate in predominantly white neighborhoods was less than 1/10 his rate in minority communities. The statistical evidence was devastating. No defense attorney could explain away such disparate treatment. Devin advanced to September 25th. Thompson's behavior toward women was particularly degrading. The footage showed Thompson pulling over Lisa Rodriguez, a 28-year-old mother driving to pick up her children from daycare. "You know why I stopped you, sweetheart?" Thompson's voice dripped with condescension. "No, sir. I was driving the speed limit." "Sure you were. Step out of the car. Let me see how well you can walk a straight line." Thompson had subjected her to unnecessary field sobriety tests while her 3 children waited at daycare. When she mentioned her kids, Thompson's response was callous. "You should have thought about that before you decided to drive drunk." She wasn't drunk. She wasn't impaired. She was a working mother whose only crime was driving while Latina in Thompson's territory. Devin advanced to October 3rd. This is where Thompson's behavior escalated to criminal conduct. The footage showed Thompson arresting Jamal Peterson, a 17-year-old honor student, for alleged drug possession. As Thompson handcuffed the teenager, his voice was clearly audible. "Another young thug off the streets. Maybe you'll learn something in county lockup, boy." The racial slur hung in the air like poison. Even worse, the drugs Thompson claimed to find were later revealed to be breath mints from the teenager's backpack. The charges were dropped when lab analysis proved the controlled substance was peppermint candy, Devin said, but not before Jamal spent 3 nights in juvenile detention and was suspended from school. Detective Foster looked sick. "We processed that arrest. The report said Thompson found crack cocaine." "Thompson planted evidence or deliberately misidentified legal items to justify arrests," Devin replied. "Jamal's mother is now considering a lawsuit for malicious prosecution." The room fell silent. Planting evidence was a felony that could send Thompson to federal prison for decades. Agent Martinez took over the presentation. "But today's incident represents the culmination of Thompson's pattern of behavior. The conference room monitor is filled with multiple video feeds. Devon's hidden cameras, civilian cell phone recordings, police body cameras, and traffic surveillance footage. The incident played from every angle, creating an undeniable record of Thompson's conduct. Thompson's voice echoed through the room. "Get back in your cab where you belong, boy." Captain Mueller closed his eyes. The raw footage was worse than the written reports had suggested. Thompson conducted an illegal pretext stop with no probable cause, Martinez continued. He used racially charged language, fabricated multiple charges, and showed callous disregard for Mrs. Washington's medical emergency. They watched Thompson dismiss Mrs. Washington's chest pain as drama queen behavior, even as paramedics later confirmed she'd suffered a stress-induced cardiac episode. Mrs. Washington's medical records show she was hospitalized for 6 hours, Martinez added. Doctors confirmed that severe psychological stress triggered her cardiac arrhythmia. She could have died. The room fell silent as the footage ended. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and professionally devastating. "Where is Officer Thompson now?" Agent Martinez asked. "Suspended pending investigation," Captain Mueller replied. "Union representative is with him in conference room C. We'll need to interview him formally. This is now a federal criminal investigation." Detective Foster looked up from her notes. "What charges are you considering?" "Title 18, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. Title 18, Section 1341, Mail fraud for false police reports. Possibly Title 18, Section 371, Conspiracy if we find evidence of systematic cover-up." Mueller's face went pale. Federal charges meant federal prison, not departmental discipline. "We'll also need to interview Officer Santos," Martinez continued. "His testimony will be crucial." 20 minutes later, Officer Miguel Santos sat in the same chair, his hands trembling slightly. 3 years on the force, clean record, but he'd witnessed everything Thompson had done. "Officer Santos," Devon said gently, "you've been Thompson's partner for 8 months. Have you observed behavior similar to what happened today?" Santos looked around the room nervously. His career, his pension, his future depended on his next words. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "Many times." "Can you give us specific examples?" Santos took a deep breath. "Last month, Thompson stopped an elderly black man walking his dog, kept him on the ground for 20 minutes, claiming he matched a robbery suspect. The man was 75 years old, using a walker." "What happened to the robbery suspect report?" "There was no robbery. Thompson made it up on the spot when people started recording with their phones. More testimony, more evidence, more confirmation of Thompson's systematic fabrication of justifications. 2 weeks ago, Thompson pulled over a car full of teenagers coming home from a church youth group meeting, made them all get out, searched the vehicle, found nothing. Then he wrote citations for loitering even though they were driving, not loitering." Santos continued with incident after incident. Thompson targeting interracial couples, Thompson harassing black business owners. Thompson used traffic stops to fish for immigration violations among Hispanic drivers. "Did you ever report these incidents?" I mentioned concerns to Thompson directly. He told me to focus on my own job if I wanted to keep it. "Did you report to supervisors?" Santos hesitated. "The precinct culture, it's understood that you don't report on other officers, especially senior officers like Thompson. The blue wall of silence, cops protecting cops regardless of misconduct. It was a cultural problem that went beyond individual behavior. Thompson told me that complaints against police don't stick if you write good reports and have the union's backing," Santos continued. "He said internal affairs always sides with officers over civilians." Detective Foster's face flushed with shame. Santos was describing exactly how the system had failed for years. "What changed your mind today?" Devon asked. "Mrs. Washington," Santos replied immediately. "When she started having chest pain and Thompson called her a drama queen, that was too much. She reminded me of my grandmother. She could have died because of his pride. The human cost of police misconduct, a 73-year-old retired teacher nearly dying from stress because an officer couldn't control his racism." At 9:30 p.m., Thompson was finally brought into the conference room for formal questioning. His union representative, a thin man in an expensive suit, sat beside him with a legal pad covered in notes. Thompson looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 hours. His confident swagger was gone. replaced by the hunched posture of a man watching his life collapse in real time. "Officer Thompson," Agent Martinez began formally, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court." The Miranda warning in a police station conference room, the ultimate role reversal. "My client will not be making any statements," the union representative interjected quickly. "That's your right," Martinez acknowledged. "But I want to ensure Officer Thompson understands the severity of the charges he's facing." She slid a document across the table. "Federal indictment for civil rights violations. Minimum sentence of 1 year in federal prison. Maximum of 10 years. Thompson's face went white as he read the charges. His union representative whispered urgently in his ear. "There's also a civil lawsuit Mrs. Washington's family will likely file," Martinez continued. "Excessive force, civil rights violations, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Given her hospitalization, damages could exceed $500,000. Thompson's hands shook as he set down the indictment. His pension, his career, his freedom, everything was gone. "However," Martinez said, leaning forward, "federal prosecutors are willing to consider cooperation agreements for defendants who provide information about systematic misconduct. The offer was clear: help clean up the precinct and face reduced charges, or fight alone and face the full weight of federal prosecution." Thompson looked around the room, at Captain Mueller, who'd failed to supervise him properly, at Detective Foster, who'd dismissed dozens of legitimate complaints, at Devon, the federal agent he'd humiliated and arrested. Finally, Thompson spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "That taxi driver, he's really FBI?" "Special Agent Devon Clark, 15-year veteran, decorated investigator," Martinez confirmed. "Every insult you hurled, every constitutional violation you committed, was recorded by a federal agent. Thompson's cooperation would expose years of systematic misconduct, leading to the largest police corruption investigation in Chicago's recent history." 6 weeks later, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was packed as Judge Patricia Williams delivered her sentence. Thompson sat at the defendant's table, no longer the arrogant officer who had terrorized civilians, but a broken man in an orange jumpsuit. "Officer Bradford Thompson," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you have pleaded guilty to willful deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Thompson's cooperation had been extensive. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he'd provided testimony that led to 8 additional arrests within Precinct 19. Captain Mueller faced charges for willful blindness to constitutional violations. Detective Foster was terminated for systematic dismissal of legitimate complaints. 3 other officers were indicted for participating in Thompson's pattern of misconduct. The evidence shows a deliberate, systematic campaign to deny constitutional rights to minority citizens," Judge Williams continued. "Your actions were not momentary lapses in judgment, but calculated abuse of the power entrusted to you by the community." Mrs. Washington sat in the gallery's front row, her daughter beside her for support. The cardiac episode had required ongoing treatment, but she'd insisted on attending every hearing. "I want to see justice done," she'd told reporters. "Not just for me, but for everyone who couldn't speak up. The sentence of this court is 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation," Judge Williams announced. "You are permanently barred from employment in law enforcement at any level." Thompson's head dropped. 18 months was less than the maximum, but the permanent ban meant his career was over forever. No police department, sheriff's office, or security firm requiring law enforcement certification would ever hire him. The civil lawsuit had been settled out of court. Mrs. Washington received $350,000 from the city, money that would cover her medical expenses and provide security for her remaining years. But more importantly, the settlement included a consent decree requiring federal oversight of police reforms. Agent Devon Clark watched from the back of the courtroom as justice was finally served. Operation Clean Sweep had exceeded all expectations, resulting in the most comprehensive police accountability measures Chicago had seen in decades. The precinct reforms were already showing results. New hiring practices emphasized community policing and de-escalation training. Every officer now wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with civilians. Civilian oversight boards reviewed all use of force incidents and discrimination complaints. Officer Santos had been promoted to detective, his courage in testifying against Thompson earning respect throughout the department. The blue wall of silence was beginning to crack as younger officers realized that reporting misconduct was their duty, not betrayal. The Chicago Police Department has committed to fundamental changes in training, supervision, and accountability, Mayor Catherine Rodriguez announced at a press conference following the sentencing. We cannot undo the harm caused by Officer Thompson's actions, but we can ensure it never happens again. The federal consent decree required annual audits of police stops, arrests, and complaints. Any pattern of discriminatory enforcement would trigger immediate federal intervention. Community liaisons now work directly with federal monitors to ensure civilian concerns were addressed promptly and thoroughly. 3 months after Thompson's sentencing, Devin returned to his regular FBI duties. The undercover assignment had been emotionally draining. 3 months of absorbing racist insults and watching innocent people suffer abuse. But the results spoke for themselves. Operation Clean Sweep has become a model for federal intervention in police misconduct cases, FBI Director James Patterson told a Congressional Oversight Committee. Agent Clark's work demonstrates that systematic civil rights violations can be documented and prosecuted effectively when proper resources are dedicated to the task. The ripple effects extended beyond Chicago. Police departments nationwide implemented policy changes to avoid federal scrutiny. Training academies revised curricula to emphasize constitutional policing and community relations. The message was clear. The FBI was watching, and misconduct would have consequences. Mrs. Washington had recovered fully from her cardiac episode, though the trauma remained. She'd become an advocate for police reform, speaking at community meetings and police training sessions about the human cost of discrimination. I don't hate Officer Thompson, she told a gathering of police recruits. I pity him. He threw away his career and his freedom because he couldn't see past the color of my skin. Don't make this mistake. The taxi that Devin had driven for 3 months was retired from active service but not destroyed. It sat in the FBI's training facility in Quantico, Virginia, where new agents learned about undercover operations and civil rights investigations. Thompson would serve his sentence at a federal minimum security facility, spending his days in prison laundry and kitchen duties. His wife had filed for divorce. His pension was forfeit. His reputation was destroyed. But the community he'd terrorized was healing. Trust between police and civilians was slowly being rebuilt through transparency, accountability, and justice. The system had worked, finally and decisively. Justice had prevailed. 1 year later, Agent Devin Clark stood in the same Chicago neighborhood where his undercover assignment had begun. The yellow taxicabs still moved through traffic, but something fundamental had changed. Police interactions with civilians were different now, more respectful, more professional, more constitutional. The transformation wasn't perfect. Decades of mistrust couldn't be erased overnight. But the federal consent decree had teeth, and everyone knew it. Officers who violated civil rights faced federal prosecution, not just departmental discipline. The message had been received throughout law enforcement. Accountability was real. Mrs. Eleanor Washington celebrated her 74th birthday surrounded by family, friends, and community leaders. Her granddaughter had graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in criminal justice, inspired by her grandmother's courage in the face of injustice. She wants to be part of the solution, Mrs. Washington said proudly. Make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Officer Miguel Santos, now Detective Santos, had become a respected voice for police reform within the department. His testimony against Thompson had cost him some friendships, but earned him something more valuable: the trust of the community he served. Speaking up was the hardest thing I've ever done, Santos reflected, but staying silent would have made me complicit in Thompson's crimes. Real police officers protect people from criminals, even when those criminals wear badges. The statistical evidence of change was compelling. Civilian complaints against police had dropped 60% in the reform precincts. Use of force incidents involving minorities had decreased by 45%. Community trust surveys showed gradual but consistent improvement in police-civilian relations. Bradford Thompson had served 14 months of his federal sentence before being released to supervise probation. He worked at a warehouse outside Chicago. His law enforcement career permanently ended. He'd lost everything, his job, his pension, his family, his reputation, because he couldn't treat people with basic human dignity. Thompson's case sent a message throughout law enforcement, explained Professor Maria Santos from Northwestern University's Police Accountability Project. Federal oversight works when it's properly implemented and consistently enforced. The broader impact extended far beyond Chicago. Police departments nationwide had implemented reforms to avoid federal intervention. Body camera programs expanded. Civilian oversight boards gained real authority. Training programs emphasized constitutional policing over aggressive enforcement. Agent Devin Clark had returned to his regular FBI duties, but Operation Clean Sweep remained his most significant professional achievement. The case had been studied at law enforcement academies, featured in congressional hearings, and cited in federal court decisions. Undercover work is always challenging, Devin reflected. But when you're documenting civil rights violations, when you're watching innocent people suffer because of an officer's prejudice, the mission becomes personal. Justice isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about protecting the constitutional rights that define our democracy. The taxi that had served as Devin's cover vehicle was now displayed at the FBI Academy in Quantico, a reminder to new agents that justice sometimes requires extraordinary patience and courage. Mrs. Washington's medical records showed complete recovery from her stress-induced cardiac episode, but her impact on police reform would last generations. She'd transformed personal trauma into community healing, showing that ordinary citizens could hold powerful institutions accountable. The lesson was clear. Assumptions based on appearance can be dangerous, even deadly. The taxi driver you dismiss might be a federal agent. The elderly woman you ignore might become a symbol of justice. The system you think protects you might be the same system that destroys you. Real change requires courage, the courage to speak up, stand up, and never accept injustice as inevitable. Have you ever witnessed discrimination or abuse of power? Have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? The next time you see injustice, remember Mrs. Washington, remember Agent Clark, remember that one person's courage can change everything. Share this story if you believe in accountability. Like this video if you support police reform. Subscribe to Black Voices Uncut for more stories about justice prevailing over prejudice. Together, we can build a society where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of the color of their skin or the job they appear to hold. Justice isn't automatic. It requires all of us to demand better.
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.